Like a grand and miraculous spaceship, our planet has sailed through the universe of time.
Like a grand and miraculous spaceship.
Grand and miraculous.
Grand and miraculous.
I think with the Muppets, there's sort of an innocence to them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that appeals to the child in everybody. Because I think everybody is a child in everybody still.
Well, we all want to build a time machine, don't we? So when you enter Disneyland, you're entering a time machine.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Grand and Miraculous. We are back on Tuesday night. I hope everybody's doing great. We are going to talk about a really fun attraction tonight, the Enchanted Tiki Room. There's lots of great history with this attraction and lots of great trivia to go into depth about. First and foremost, I want to make an apology and thank everybody in the audience. We had to postpone last week's episode. I had a little medical issue regarding a thing in the neck. So for those of you who spend a fraction of the amount of time that I spend in front of a computer screen, please take care of your health. It's impossible to underscore how important that is. Invest in good ergonomics. When you're sitting in front of a computer and you're just so focused, you usually don't think about these things. So long story short, I'm doing fine. But it turns out that there is some kind of a weird, maybe a pinched nerve or a bad muscle. I don't know what's going on, but I'm having it looked at. But I'm very grateful for all the kind comments and all the nice thoughts that people have sent my way. I'm doing fine, just trying to deal with a little bit more pain, a little bit more creaky bones than I'm used to. But I suppose that comes with the territory. So I'm really excited that you're here tonight. We're going to talk about the Tiki Room, which is a much loved attraction. And I just want to say thank you for bearing with some scheduling issues. We're going to talk a little bit about some exciting episodes coming up later, but I'll save that for now. So for those of you who haven't seen before, my name's John. I go by the username Spaceship Ears. This channel, what we're trying to do with this channel is to go into different attractions, but not simply from a historical point of view. We're trying to tease these apart a little bit and figure out why these attractions work the way they do and why they capture our hearts, or in some cases don't. This is our mission statement. We want to unveil the magic behind theme park attractions, exploring their creators, their immersive worlds, and the moments that keep us coming back with your voice shaping the journey. One thing I want to do before getting into tonight's episode is to talk a little bit about what happened on the website. So let's see if I can share this window with you. And it turns out that we have some exciting news. So as some of you may recall, we do have a website. It's grandmiraculous.com. There's no and in it. Couldn't get that domain name. But if you go to grandmiraculous.com, which is our community voting site, you can see some of the scores that people have submitted. And the last time we were on air, we talked about the People Mover. And it turns out, hey, we have a new champion. People really, really love the People Mover, which is not unsurprising, but it has a score of 8.53, which is probably the highest score we've had to date. And that radar plot just almost completely covers that triangle. In terms of sheer delight, it was a 9.55, which is fantastic. The only place where it suffers a little bit, and this is in the storytelling department, there's not a whole big story being told with the People Mover. So that's not surprising, but I'm very pleased to see that it's doing that well. So again, I want to encourage you all as we cover different attractions, please do go to the website, grandmiraculous.com, and we'll have a different voting code each week. You can vote for the Enchanted Tiki Room tonight. Let me go into chat a little bit and say hi to some folks. So first in chat tonight was Beaker and Honeydew. I know you're not here tonight, but thanks for coming. Mr. Lamont's great. It's great to have you. Pirate Queen Trish, hope you're doing great. Thanks for all your support. Fire Dragon 57 is here. Dad is here. Hello, Dad. Hope you're doing well. And my stepmom, Miss K Bell's in the chat. Barbara Duncan is here. Fire Dragon, did I say hi? I think I said hi. Miss Debbie Bernfeld is always a fantastic supporter of this channel. Thank you for being here. Jason Thibodeau and Gloria, super supporters. I'm so grateful that you're here. Mr. David T. It's me, David T. is here. He's given me lots of great feedback off channel. So I'm very grateful for that. Let's see. Mattercan Matt is here. Hello, Mr. Matt. It was fantastic to see you with TPC the other night on screen. Pete McDevitt, the master, the Captain Pete. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. And I think, Miss Udalali Lane is in the chat. Hello, Kate. Hope you're doing great. And I think that covers it for now. So if I see anybody new, I will be sure to highlight you in a bit. So tonight we're going to talk about the Tiki Room. I want to throw up our usual trivia question. So every episode, I like to throw up some trivia that you can think about. So one thing you'll learn tonight is the Tiki Room was not actually owned by the theme park proper. It was actually owned separately by Wet Enterprises. So because of this, the admission ticket to the Tiki Room was originally separate from the rest of the park. It wasn't an A, B, C, D, or E ticket. So a special ticket was issued for admission. How much do you think this ticket was? Because it was a special ticket that you had to buy for. Of course, eventually it became part of the A, B, C, E, D, E tickets. But when the Tiki Room first opened, how much do you think the admission went for? And I'd encourage you to throw your thoughts into chat and to talk about it. Also, please feel free to share your memories of the Tiki Room. This attraction has been around a long time. It's a very historical attraction, and I'm sure everybody has some interesting memories of it, and it would be fun to share that. And once again, I want to encourage you to go to the website, grandmiraculous.com. Tonight's entry code is probably no surprise. It's the MC of the whole show. It's Jose, J-O-S-E. So go ahead and go to the website when you can, and you can punch in your own impression of the show. So with that said, let us get to it. I will share my screen here. One moment. Stop screen. Share the right window. And here we go. So tonight is the Enchanted Tiki Room, one of my favorites. Tonight we're going to talk about the Tiki Room, but first and foremost, I like to go over the basics in terms of the methodology. I like to point out that evaluating theme park attractions is extremely subjective. You get two people in a room, you'll probably have 10 different opinions. So how do we try to make this a little bit more methodical? I propose 3 different axes or 3 different pillars on how to evaluate these attractions. One of them is immersion, second is storytelling, and the third is delight. So after we go through the history of this great attraction, we'll try to tease the attraction apart a little bit along these bases. I represent these kind of votes or kind of impressions through what's known as a radar plot. Long story short, the more blue that covers the triangle, the better the attraction is. In fact, if you go to our website, you can see how some attractions are just bright blue and some are just a little bit of blue, and that's okay. So keeping in mind, this is not a monologue. It's very easy for people, including me, to come up and chat about these wondrous attractions that we all love and just go on and on. But at the end of the day, my opinion is just one person's opinion. So like I've mentioned, I've set up a website you can go to and punch in your vote. And it's interesting to see what the community has to say about different attractions. And yeah, it's fun to see if these pillars are really the 3 pillars we should go after. Maybe there's an entirely different pivot we should think about, but we could talk about all that as time goes on. Keep in mind, this is a labor of love. If you like the message or like the idea of what we're doing here, please go and support a worthy charity. One that I like is the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society. This is a group that I highlight every week. They actually have a big event coming up called Retro Magic. Some of you may have been to the 2023 Retro Magic a couple of years ago, which was great. My dad was on the panel. This year, they are having a new session, September 26 to 28. And I know that they have some high-powered individuals on their panel. So if you're at all interested in this stuff, I would highly encourage you to go. It's a fantastic show. I have no partnership with them. They're not a sponsor. I just like to encourage people to delve into Disney history and attraction history. And that's probably paradise for those of us who love this stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the Tiki Room a little bit. Where did it come from and where is it going? So first and foremost, before we get into the actual attractions, I like to highlight various Imagineers and various individuals that really had high impact to an attraction. Of course, each attraction, it has hundreds of people who work on it, and it would be impossible to highlight everybody. But I like to encourage you to think about a few key people who were really instrumental in the making of these attractions. And in your mind, to try to think about these names. And as you go through and enjoy the park, think about, the people who have actually invested a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into these attractions that you enjoy. First and foremost is Roger Brogy. We've talked about Roger before. I'm not going to go over his history again, but he was instrumental in creating some of the first animatronics, including the ones we'll talk about tonight, especially the Abraham Lincoln animatronic. Mr. Rolly Crump we get to talk about tonight. This is a beloved individual. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but Rolly is, his handprints are all over the Tiki Room. Most people know him for It's a Small World, but he had a tremendous impact on the Enchanted Tiki Room. He was a good friend of my dad's. I was honored enough to know him personally when I was a kid. And let's talk about his history a little bit. Rolly was born in 1930 in Alhambra. He joined Disney in 1952. And he worked on Peter Pan, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, and he worked actually as an in-between artist and assistant animator. In 1959, he joined WED, where he helped design, name it, and he worked on it. Haunted Mansion, Enchanted Tiki Room, and of course, Adventureland Bazaar. He was brought into WED, and he worked on many of the 1964 World's Fair attractions, including It's a Small World. He left Disney in the 70s to go work on some other projects like Knott's Berry Tales, Busch Gardens, and Ringling Brothers. But he returned to Disney and he put his handprints on the Land and the Wonders of Life Pavilion in Epcot. So he has an enduring impact on many attractions, and we love and miss Rolly dearly. Mr. John Hench is another critically important person to this story that we'll talk about tonight. We've covered John Hench before, so I'll skip over some of the details tonight, but keep in mind, some of the names that you'll hear, you'll start to hear them over and over again. And in your mind, you can start to keep these this kind of index of various Imagineers who have had high impact on these attractions. Miss Harriet Burns, we've talked about before. Harriet had a tremendous impact on the tiki birds themselves, and we'll learn about that in a little bit. She was the first female Disney Imagineer, so not only did she have a tremendous impact in many attractions, but she was a historical figure in her own right. She worked on the Sleeping Beauty Castle, the Matterhorn, Pirates, and the Tiki Room, of course. And we got to talk about the Sherman Brothers. Whenever we have an attraction with a very memorable piece of music, usually the Sherman Brothers are involved. and we'll talk about what they contributed tonight as well. Okay, facts and figures. Well, there are 3 instances of the Tiki Room around the world. Of course, the primary one is in Disneyland, we'll talk about tonight. It opened June 23, 1963, so about 8 years after the park opened. Magic Kingdom opened with the park opening on October 1st, 1971. And Tokyo Disneyland also opened with the park opening April 15th, 1983. Now, when it comes to the origination of this wonderful Polynesian show that we all love so much, it's pretty interesting that we have to actually go to a completely different place in the world to talk about where this attraction came from. It actually all started in New Orleans, of all places. Of course, you all probably know that Walt Disney loved New Orleans. He devoted a healthy chunk of Disneyland to New Orleans in the form of New Orleans Square. But it turns out that when he was in New Orleans, he actually wandered into an antique store and he purchased a very, very famous mechanical toy. It was a mechanical toy bird made by Bontemps of Paris. And he was fascinated because this little bird could turn its head around, he could flap his wings and tail, and he can open his beak to whistle. And he loved it. He grabbed it and he brought it back home with him. And he gave it to Wet Enterprises and said, hey, take a look at this. You know, this is a pretty cool idea. Do you think that we can improve upon this little bird in a cage? Well, he had Walter Rogers and some other studio technicians take the bird apart, unfortunately, to see how it worked. Thankfully, it's put back together again. But they were trying to figure out, gosh, is there any idea or any kind of a compelling idea behind this little toy bird that we could bring to the theme park? Well, of course, the natural inclination was, hey, if we could do birds, maybe we can even do humans. Of course, Walt wanted to see if he could actually represent a human being in the same type of form. There was a sculptor, Charles Cristodoro, and he modeled some heads using actually famous figures like Buddy Ebsen and other people as actual models. So he came up with some ideas, some of these pictures you see here on the screen. Well, at the time, Walt really wanted, of all things, a Chinese restaurant in the park. When he was thinking about these potential fake human beings in the attractions, he was thinking about building a Chinese restaurant. And in the lobby would be an animatronic of Confucius. And customers would ask questions to this figure, and he would provide answers. Of course, Walt had other great ideas as well. He featured a dinner show with birds, a fire-breathing dragon, things like that. Now, at the time, not only were they working on ideas for this Chinese restaurant, but they were so inspired by creating a mechanical man that they were working on Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. What everybody knows about Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, we'll cover that attraction at some point in the future. It debuted in 1964. So the Chinese restaurant idea was abandoned. Instead, Walt started thinking about a tiki room. And what I want to do now is to show a little video, if I can get away with it, of Dave Smith, which is a famous Disney archivist. And he'll talk a little bit about where this idea came from. Let's see if this works.
Hi, I'm Dave Smith, the Disney archivist, and today we're going to talk about one of Walt's inventions, Audio-Animatronics.
Just as we had to learn to make our animated cartoons talk, we had to find a way to make these characters talk too. Now, to accomplish this, we created a new type of animation, so new that we had to invent a new name for it.
Audio-Animatronics?
Right, Audio-Animatronics.
Walt Disney was an innovator, and he was always eager to try new things. One of the things that really intrigued him was this bird. He found this bird in a New Orleans antique shop when he was there on vacation. And he was so intrigued by the way that it moved and sang. He thought, you know, it'd be kind of fun to do something with dimensional animation. We've been doing animation on film for years, but we haven't been doing things with dimension. And so he brought this back to the studio and had his technicians take it apart to see how it worked. And he then brought in a sculptor to start working on some human figures. This is actually Ward Kimball, who was one of the animators at the Disney studio, who posed for this sculptor. Next, they went to a full-size head, and it was Confucius. He was going to be in a Chinese restaurant at Disneyland and talk to you when you came there to eat. Well, we never built our Chinese restaurant, but instead we did Abraham Lincoln. And that was the first full-size human figure that we worked on. Abraham Lincoln.
I'll pause it there because then they start talking about the human audio-animatronics, and we're talking about Tiki Room tonight. Let me add this back. So that was some of the history behind where this idea originated from. Of course, it took very talented people and Imagineers to actually bring this to life. Rowley, of course, tells wonderful stories in his memoirs. If you haven't read his book, it's a great book. One of the stories he tells was, hey, we were sitting in one of these little rooms and Walt told us, well, we're making some changes to Adventureland, and I think we'd like to put a little tiki room here, just a little tiki room. And Rowley said, sure, Walt. We all said, that sounds just fine. And I want it to be a restaurant. We assured Walt that a restaurant would be just fine too. So as a result, there were some phenomenal sketches being made. This is a famous sketch by John Hench, where they were thinking about some of the ideas that they could come up with this tiki room. And of course, it looks quite different today because you had tables and you had people wandering around because originally it was a restaurant. Well, some of these ideas scared Walt a little bit. Well, Walt told John Hench, you can't put birds in there, John. John Hench wasn't sure why not, but Walt was emphatic about not having birds in the tiki room. Finally, Walt came out with it. He says, well, the birds will poop in the food, except he didn't use the word poop. John Hench explained, they're not real birds, Walt. They're stuffed birds. And to Walt, that was almost as bad as poop. We don't stuff birds here at Disneyland. And John Hench reassured him, they only look stuffed. They're mechanical and they cheap. And then Walt started to get the idea. He said, well, maybe they can move a little and sing. I want to play now a little clip from some of Rowley's memories.
It's showtime!
It's kind of a cute story. Basically, they were getting ready to redo Adventureland. And someone came up with the idea, well, maybe we should have a little restaurant. So we had our first meeting with Walt, and there was only 5 of us in the meeting. And Walt just said, well, I think it's a Tahitian area, so we should have some kind of a little tiki room in there. So John Hench was in the meeting, and they asked John to do a little rendering of what a little tiki room might look like. And Walt took one look at it, and he says, well, John, you've got birds in cages there. And John said, yeah. And he said, well, you can't have birds in cages. He said, because they'll poop in the food. And John said, oh, no, Walt, no. He says, they're not real birds. They're stuffed birds. And Walt said, no, Disney doesn't stuff birds, John. And John said, no, they look like they're stuffed birds, but they're little mechanical birds. And then one of the other fellows in the meeting said, well, we could probably get the birds to chirp to each other.
Hey, Michael, mi amigo, pay attention, it's showtime.
Actually, the Tiki Room was the first audio-animatronic show that was ever made.
Audio-Animatronics?
Right, audio-animatronics. Audio for sound.
See, and electronically animated by sound.
Walt turned to me and said, Rowley, if people are standing outside, they've got to have something to kind of occupy them. Why don't you come up with some ideas of some tikis that might talk to the people out there?
My name is Maui. Natives call me the Mighty One.
I sculpted probably 70% of all the tikis in the Tiki Room, the pre-show tikis. And then I did the fountain. I did the bird mobile that comes out of the ceiling with all the birds on it. The beautiful thing about it was that we had the whole show designed and ready to be put into Disneyland, and Walt said, this is too good for a restaurant. We won't have it as a restaurant, we'll make it as an attraction. So that's what started the Tiki Room.
So there you have it. I should have just let Rowley explain it. He tells stories much better than I do. So as you can tell, this was where the Tiki Room as an attraction came about to be. It didn't turn out to be a restaurant, But we'll talk about some of the aspects of that a little bit later. Let me go to chat. I've seen some more folks pop in, some good friends. Dave's Disney Dreams is here. Hey, Dave, hope you're doing great. Zippity Doug, Mr. Doug, hope you're doing great. Pete's here. Debbie's here. Mr. Dave S is here. Hey, Dave, hope you're doing great. And I think that's it for now. If I see new names come in, I'll be sure to point you out. So going back to the script here, this is really the birth of audio-animatronics as a whole. The Tiki Room would eventually become a place with lots of different tropical creatures synchronized to a musical score. Now, the way this worked, and I'll show some more video about this, tones recorded on tape would vibrate a little metal reed, and it closed a circuit. So it was basically a relay, and it turns the animation on or off. So you'll see that especially in some of the flowers that descend from the ceiling. There's not a whole lot of range of motion. It's either on or off. And it turns out that the term audio-animatronics as a term was first used commercially in 1961. Walt described it like this. He says, "It's just animation with sound, run by electronics. It's an extension of animated drawings. We take an inanimate object and we make it move." So while the dining area, when it was still a restaurant idea, was being furnished, Imagineers created a captivating show featuring all these animatronic birds. The performance included birds chirping, singing, doing narration, and music. And as we know it today, it was designed to delight guests in the Tiki Room. Well, Walt loved it. He was reportedly so in love with it that he believed guests would love it just as much. Now, here's a problem. And another reason why the restaurant idea went the way of the dodo is that they thought this show would be so popular that people would just hang out in the restaurant. They wouldn't leave. They would just hang out in the restaurant and watch the birds over and over again. So the concept of diners lingering in the restaurant was a big concern because the show was so good. So, hey, it's a good problem to have. Well, of course, it was a business problem because, you want to keep people flowing through the restaurant and through the attraction. So they had to do something. And they eventually turned it into a standalone attraction. This is, of course, where the Sherman Brothers come into play. The Sherman Brothers, famous Disney musicians, fantastic artists. Turns out that Walt mocked up a test version of what they called at the time Legends of the Enchanted Tiki in stage 2 at the studio. Walt invited the Sherman Brothers, of course, by then his trusted songwriters, to experience the show and to enjoy it. Well, one of them, Richard Sherman, speculated that their 1960 hit, which was called Pineapple Princess, may have inspired Walt's decision to involve them. They ended up proposing a calypso-style tune based on a song they wrote for a Disney TV special about Swiss Family Robinson. And of course, we know it today. I won't pretend to sing it, but you know it today as a Tiki 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 Room. And of course, it was instantly approved by Walt. He fell in love with it and became the introduction to the attraction. And initially, there were actually no character birds. There would just be a collection of random birds in the attraction and plants and things like that. Well, the Sherman Brothers were the ones responsible for bringing actual main characters to the show. Originally, they proposed a single parrot MC to tie the whole show together. Well, of course, Walt loved it. And in his the way that he plussed up ideas, he expanded it. And he created 4 distinct MCs with distinct accents. Of course, we know them today: French, Spanish, German, and Irish. Like I mentioned, the Shermans loved this idea that, and this tendency that Walt had. They called it plussing. When you had an idea and you not only run with it, but you actually throw it a little bit further than it was originally conceptualized. Writers like Larry Clemens, Marty Sklar, Wally Bogue, and Fulton Burley added humor, and it completed the cast and tone for the show's debut. Now, there are actually some remnants of the original restaurant here. As I mentioned, Walt initially planned the Tiki Room as a restaurant within Disneyland, keeping the original dining concept alive. There were features like restaurant-style chairs used for seating, but they were later replaced by the benches we know today. And the attraction was designed actually to share a kitchen. It was abutted up against the Plaza Pavilion and the Tahitian Terrace, so that it could actually share a kitchen for the restaurant. Well, it remains today to be the only Disneyland attraction with its own restrooms. And that happens to be a remnant of its planned role as a restaurant. In fact, the centerpiece magic fountain that we all know that rises in the beginning and has all the birds float down, that was originally designed to be a coffee station, and it actually had a hidden storage compartment built into it to serve as some of the supporting material for the restaurant idea. Well, the Enchanted Tiki Room officially opened in 1963. It was sponsored by, of all companies, United Airlines, which actually aligned pretty well with the attraction's tropical theme, because at the time, Hawaii had just become a US state. You have to think about these things in context. So the idea of having people actually go visit the Tiki Room, enjoy the Polynesian show, and then go to Hawaii was a pretty compelling idea, and one of the reasons why United actually ended up sponsoring the Tiki Room. So it was a very, very well done strategic and timely match. And it had air conditioning, which was a big deal at the time. The Tiki Room was the first Disney attraction. Of course, it showcased audio-animatronics, but in order to support all of these audio-animatronics, the attraction had to use computers. And these banks of computers were housed physically underneath the venue, underground in an operations room. Well, this technical infrastructure at the time, you can imagine, required air conditioning. So as a result, the Tiki Room was the first air-conditioned attraction at Disneyland. So, of course, that added to the appeal, and it also helped the Tiki Room become enormously popular, especially during warm Southern California summers. Now, in terms of the birds, Disney used real feathers to make them look lifelike. But at the time, they had a really hard time trying to make the birds look realistic. Well, this is where we turn our attention to Harriet Burns, the Imagineer. Turns out that during lunch with Walt, Harriet Burns noticed that his cashmere sweater that he was famously wearing, it moved just like they imagined the birds' chests breathing in and out, in and out. So she went off and she experimented. She created a custom woven fabric whose movement created the really lifelike movement that the tiki birds themselves had. At launch, the 4 birds all shared the same feather colors, white, green, yellow, and blue. But it turns out that over time, they wanted to distinguish the MCs a little bit more. So they were recolored later on to reflect their national identities. Of course, Jose was red, white, and green. Michael was white and green, and so on and so forth. And the tikis themselves had a lot to do with the experience as well. As everybody knows in Disneyland, and to some degree in Florida, before you enter the show, you walk through a lush pre-show area featuring large tiki statues. Well, like you heard from Rolly, these tikis were sculptured by Rolly Crump, despite his lack of prior sculpting experience. In fact, some people don't know this. Rolly hadn't sculpted a single thing before he was asked to do this, which was amazing. Rolly used plasticine clay kept worn in the parking lot, and he famously sculpted it with a plastic fork he grabbed from the cafeteria. So that just goes to show you don't need fancy equipment to create some phenomenal art. Of course, molds were later created from his original clay sculptures, and they created fiberglass tikis durable enough for outdoor exposure. So all of those tikis you see outside were created in a cafeteria using a plastic fork. So if he could do it, you can too. In terms of the interior of the Tiki Room, Rolly designed a rotating bird mobile, of course, in the show described as Wunderbar, that became the show's centerpiece. Now, the Tiki drummers that take over later were originally static and visually dull in early designs. So Rolly applied his magic to them, and he added sparkling gems to their eyes. And as anybody who's been to the Tiki Room knows, that when they move around, those gems make a big difference in terms of adding lifelike behavior. And of course, when they play, the vibrations cause them to flicker. Now, this was the great thing about Rolly, is that he was able to take small details like this and dramatically improve the whole experience just by applying things like this. And he was one of a kind for sure. Well, initially, when the attraction first opened, a lot of guests were confused by the concept, because keep in mind, this was a brand new attraction. It was just called the Tiki Room. People didn't quite know what it was all about, and they were unsure what to expect from singing birds and flowers. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, the attraction required a separate ticket because technically the attraction was owned by WED, not by the Disney company. So it actually was more expensive than the top of the line e-ticket at the time. To answer the trivia question, it turned out to be 75 cents, which I'll show you a little bit later. Of course, later it was changed to an e-ticket in the 1960s. Now, to try to convince people to come in and to buy a ticket for this brand new attraction, they installed a special animatronic bird outside. It's known as the Barker bird. And this was an audio-animatronic McCall, voiced by Wally Bogue, and he promoted the show from above the entrance. Well, it turns out that guests were so intrigued and they stopped to watch this outdoor bird so much, it caused crowding at the opening of Adventureland. So eventually they retired the Barker bird and later displayed it in the lobby of the Disneyland Opera House. What I want to do now is to show a little video of none other than Jose talking and walking you through the behind the scenes of the actual Tiki Room, which is a lot of fun.
Aloha! It is showtime now in Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room.
Julie, I think you know our fine feathered friend here, Jose, the host of the Enchanted Tiki Room at Disneyland.
Yes, I've seen him many times there.
Jose, Julie's been selected to represent Disneyland as Miss Tencenio. Do you approve?
Thank you, Jose.
Buenos dias, señorita.
You know, the same scientific equipment that guides rockets to the moon is used to make Jose and his little friends in the Tiki Room sing, talk, move, and practically think for themselves. I guess you could call him a creature of the space age. But why don't we let Jose speak for himself down at Disneyland? Show the folks what goes on behind the scenes.
Now, what's fun here is that you'll actually see footage of the Barker bird, and then we're going to go underground a little bit to see the behind the scenes.
Buenos dias, senor and senoritas. How do you do down there? Aloha. It is showtime now in Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room. Hurry, hurry to Tiki Room. Tikis make drum go boom. Magic is happening. All the birds and flowers sing. Better come see this thing. Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room. Come to the Tiki Room. Hurry to the Tiki Room. Now, friends, before we see the show, I take you behind the scene for a few moments. The whole show runs from this room. That fellow is troubleshooter. He is the electric engineer, also veterinarian for all the Tiki Room actors. Maybe we'd like to see how everything works, okay? Water power here goes through the pipes and runs the magic fountain. Here is the air system. Pump the air for the lifelike movement. Here is now the electric power. This is the big boss. He directs everything. Brain of big boss is here. It is called programmer. Inside is running the tape. It tells us when to talk, sing, and even to breathe. This is muscle assisting all kinds of relays on this panel. They make the cockatoo head turn left and right, make the flower to open and the tiki gods sing. And here is special thing to make coffee. Come now to other side. It is easy to understand. Audio AC rectified to pulsating DC. Drives a solenoid in the bird beaks, the flower mouse, and the etc. in the cho. The flashing light means everything is going A-OK. The buzzer. Uh-oh, the show is going to start. Come along, amigos. You got to find a good seat.
So that's a little look behind the scenes, courtesy of Jose. Thank you, Jose. I love that video because not only does it show the Barker bird doing its thing, but having Jose explain the technology behind it in his own unique way is a lot of fun. We got to talk about the show a little bit. Of course, most people who are watching this channel have probably been to the Tiki Room many times, but just to remind you, before entering the attraction, you're greeted by many animated Tiki statues outside. And after a few years, when Dole took over the sponsorship of the attraction, they added a pineapple video to pitch Dole a little bit, which is a good memory that I have. When you finish watching the pre-show, the doors open and you're invited in. And of course, a cast member traditionally starts the show by tapping Jose with the bamboo cane. It turns out that if you ask nicely, you might be allowed to wake up Jose yourself. So I don't know if anyone in the chat has ever done that. And of course, they launch into the famous Tiki Room song, which we all know and love, which I will not be singing. The big number happens, and all the birds float down from the ceiling, the phenomenal float that Mr. Rolly Crump did. And they sing, let's all sing like the birdies sing. And then you have the climax, which is when the Hawaiian war chant song kicks in, performed by animated tiki carvings, of course, along the walls, who sing and play drums. Just as a nice side note, I remember going to this attraction with my mom, and my mom claimed she swore that one of the tiki gods on the wall actually winked at her every single time. Despite its title, the tune was actually a love song, not a war chant. And of course, you all know what happens. It turns into thunder and lightning and simulated rainfall and all that. Now, the ending is really fun too, because as you all know, the host birds announce a magic trick to make the audience disappear and guests begin exiting the theater. What I'm sure happens is that I'm sure people don't actually listen to the lyrics, because most people think that this is simply the famous Hi-Ho song from Snow White. Well, it turns out that the lyrics are quite different. And arguably a little bit offensive, which is part of the fun. The birds are singing, hi ho, it's out the door you go. We hope you've all enjoyed the show, which is innocuous enough. But then they start layering it on a little bit. And they say, hey, hi ho, make room for our next show. There's folks outside, go take a ride. Hi ho, hi ho, hi ho. When I first learned about these lyrics, I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of fun. I love these lyrics. And I don't know how they managed to pull this off, because if you actually listen to the lyrics, they're, it really adds a lot of personality to the birds. Let's just put it that way. The voice cast was phenomenal. It's basically a who's who of famous Disney voices. Of course, Thurl Ravenscroft voiced both Fritz and the Hawaiian god, Tangaroa, outside. He's also, of course, famous for Tony the Tiger, Grim Grinning Ghosts, and so forth. Wally Bogue voiced Jose, and he was a very famous performer in the Golden Horseshoe Revue. He co-wrote parts of the Haunted Mansion script, and he actually inspired a young Steve Martin. Fulton Burley voiced Michael. He also performed in the Golden Horseshoe. And Ernie Newton, who voiced Pierre, contributed vocals to Boo Boo from Yogi Bear. Of course, there were many other voices. Purvis Pullen, famed for his work with Spike Jones and his Sadie Slickers. So when it came time to work on some of the other parks around the world, the Tiki Room was a natural concept. The Tiki Room was, of course, a flagship Disneyland attraction, and its inclusion in Disney World was a no-brainer. Well, Florida's version plussed up a little bit, and they created a new structure called the Sunshine Pavilion, and it replaced the original small kind of cubic small theater setup with a much bigger theater. Well, of course, being Florida, it had a covered queue and a new pre-show to accommodate the Florida climate. And it was renamed, actually. Originally, it was not called the Enchanted Tiki Room. It was called the Tropical Serenade. And it opened with the park itself on October 1st, 1971. Now, the pre-show itself is a little fun. It's a little different. It featured a pre-show with two toucans, Clyde and Claude, voiced by Dallas McKinnon and Sebastian Cabot. Their dialogue shared a whimsical tale of discovering the Sunshine Pavilion, and they tried to tell a story about it. Now, just as the story gets exciting, a cast member interrupts to say, hey, the main show is starting, and guests enter a theater, replicating Disneyland's original after that point. Turns out that this pre-show format was rather successful, and they ended up reusing it for Tokyo Disneyland's version of the Tiki Room. And speaking of, the Tiki Room was brought to Tokyo Disneyland as well. It debuted on April 15th, 1983, and this also the same day the park opened. The attraction was really close to the Walt Disney World version in layout and show format. They added a few things in the queue, for example, a full array of Tiki God statues, which was a lot of fun. Now, we've got to talk about this one. In the 1990s, it turns out that there was some declining attendance, and maybe guests started indicating that they were feeling that the Tiki Room was getting a little bit long in the tooth. Well, as a result, Disney tried something, and they ended up closing the original Tropical Serenade on September 1st, 1997. It reopened the year after as the Enchanted Tiki Room under new management, and it starred Iago from Aladdin and Zazu from The Lion King as their new proprietors. It was a brand new show. It retained the original birds in the theater, but it added advanced figures, new audio animatronics, including a new character called the Tiki goddess Uh-Oh, or Oa. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I'll skim some of this stuff because some of us who have been to under new management don't have that great opinions of it. The pre-show was fun, though. They had people like Don Rickles and Phil Harmon voice the toucans outside. And the main show actually started originally as it was written, but then Iago shows up and he crashes the show. And he's vicious. He just completely criticizes the music in the Tiki Room, which hurt some of our heart. Zazu shows up from The Lion King and he tries to rein him in. And it turns out that there's a whole story about Iago insulting the Tiki gods. And it turns out that there's a brand new audio animatronic figure, rather impressive actually, popping up and start singing a rap song, which is kind of odd. But Iago eventually shows up, battered and humbled, praising the Tiki gods show. And he tries to make amends. Of course, you know, Disney being Disney, they try to have Iago say things like hunky tuna tostada instead of Hakuna Matata and so forth. So yeah, a lot of us who have been to this show, we could probably appreciate that they tried to bring some freshness to the show. But one of the problems is they were a little bit too vicious in terms of admiring and representing the original show. Instead of putting it on a pedestal, they ended up making fun of it. And I think that's what turned off a lot of guests, including myself. Well, it turns out that Tokyo itself had some new ideas too. In 1999, they had a refreshed Tiki Room in Tokyo Disneyland called Enchanted Tiki Room, Get the Fever. It also adopted a contemporary themed, it's kind of a party line centered around the different Tiki gods. It featured kind of eclectic, very modern music, departing from the original soundtrack. And they introduced 4 new birds, Dano, Scats, Buddy, and Lava. And Lava was the first female host in the Tiki Room history. Well, over in Disneyland, decided to go back to basics. Instead of going out on a limb, so to speak, they began a major refurbishment following years of deterioration and poor maintenance. They had issues like feathers falling off the birds, the thatched roof was deteriorating, and audio animatronics really needed a refresh. Well, it turns out that shortly after work began to renovate it, a portion of the roof actually collapsed. So, you know, they were on top of it. The attraction reopened in 2005 to enthusiastic crowds. And this was part of Disneyland's 50th anniversary. Of course, we just passed Disneyland's 70th anniversary. The improvements included a brand new audio track, new sound system, and fully replaced the audio animatronics. The nice thing is that they preserved the original storyline and they represented the show as it was originally intended. They weren't making fun of it like some of the other shows did. Meanwhile, over in Tokyo, they decided to do something completely different. In 2008, they replaced Get the Fever with a brand new reboot, and this featured our lovable friend Stitch from Lilo and Stitch. The show introduced 4 new birds. I won't pretend to pronounce them. And they start with a lively performance of the famous music from the movie, Hawaiian Roller Coaster. Well, it turns out the mysterious messages start appearing around the room, sparking talk of the legendary Big Kahuna and leading into a rendition of another famous song, which I won't pronounce. Well, it turns out at the time that Stitch starts showing up, he's implemented much like the goddess in Under New Management, but he's a fully formed audio animatronic right in the middle of the show. And it turns out that Stitch is the one that the birds have talked about being Big Kahuna. Well, it turns out that all's well that ends well, where he admits he didn't want to disrupt anything. He just really wanted to be part of the performance. So the birds forgive him, Stitch joins the finale, and then they have a happy ending at the end of the day. If you haven't seen the Tokyo version of Tiki Room with Stitch, it's a lot of fun. I don't think it raises to the level of the original, but I admire what they tried to do with it, and it's a fun show to watch. I should point out, too, that the influence of the Tiki Room expanded beyond the original attraction. It turns out that they actually renovated a whole restaurant in the Disneyland Hotel. Many people know of it. It's Trader Sam's. It opened in 2011 in the Disneyland Hotel. And they brought lots of Disney memorabilia, including films from Indiana Jones, 20,000 Leagues, and so forth. And what's fun about it is that they really leaned into the theming, and they featured animatronics, interactive effects, and things like that. So it's a lot of fun to go visit. A second location opened in Disney World, as many of you know. That's Polynesian Resort. And it turns out that they brought back the retired animatronic Aoa from under new management. Well, under new management eventually got evicted. In 2011, a small attic fire actually broke out in the Tiki Room. Fire sprinklers came on and they got rid of the blaze, but it was rumored that the Iago animatronic was very seriously damaged, although, of course, official details were kept quiet. That was just a rumor. Well, it turns out that the 40th anniversary was upcoming, so they decided to retire the controversial show and restore the original show in its glory. So they officially announced the return of the classic show at D23. And it opened in 2011, and it had a slightly shorter runtime than the original, but they basically tried to keep it as it was originally, as it was in Disneyland. So it was well received. No longer was there a show making fun of the original, and a lot of guests continue to love it to this day. One thing I should point out too is that in Disneyland, they actually expanded the Tiki Room beyond the original building. They built a whole new area where Aladdin's Oasis used to be, called the Tropical Hideaway. And this location basically turns out to be a new food, basically an eatery, but it offers snacks like Dole Whip and so forth, right next to the Jungle Cruise. Well, if you look up, you can actually see the homes of the Tiki Room birds. And what's really fun is that if you know the original story, there's almost a throwaway line where Jose says, "I wonder what happened to Rosita," and all the birds come down from the ceiling. Well, guess what? They actually brought Rosita to the Tropical Hideaway. So you can see her in all her glory here, which is a lot of fun. I don't have time, but there's a wonderful CBC interview with Walt talking about audio-animatronics. I'll be sure to add that to the playlist. Before I get into the analysis, let me highlight some people who have wandered in. Alyssa, Neil, thank you so much for being here. Great to see you guys here. And Monorail Molly is here. Hello, Jen. Hope you're doing great. Thanks for coming here. And I think that's it for now. So let's talk about whether the attraction actually works or not using our 3 pillars. Well, you're going to find out tonight that I'm going to be very boring in some of these ratings. You're going to see a lot of similar themes. Immersion, I give it an 8. It's pretty hard to criticize. You wander into the Tiki Room and you're immediately hit with a richly detailed Polynesian theme. It's wonderful. There's no motion to talk about, but the transitions are great, in terms of a waterfall reveal, carefully timed lighting, and things like that. Sound, temperature, and lighting is right on. It has soundtrack that brings you back to Hawaii. Cool air conditioning, of course, was a big deal, like we talked about. And very dramatic spotlights coming on from time to time heighten the sensory immersion. It's still believable to this day, believe it or not. Of course, the motion isn't nearly as good as some of the newer audio animatronics, but it sells the illusion enough to make you enjoy the show. Occasionally, there's some plants or birds that may not move as well as they should, and that can break the immersion to a small degree, but for the most part, it works. Consistency is beautiful. Every element from the entrance to the exit brings you to the idea of a tropical escape, which is fantastic. There are a few fun surprises, like the hidden fountain. If you're not ready for that big thing of water coming up, it's a lot of fun. The chandelier descent and the sudden storm bring lots of fun twists. We've talked about the effects. The integration is very well placed in Adventureland. And the queue in the pre-show is just wonderful. Watching all the tikis outside do their thing before the show just really builds anticipation and helps bring you in. Storytelling, also an 8. The show's arc is basically a very well-written show from start to finish, all the way from the joyful welcome to the storm and celebration finale. It has clear beats. Unfortunately, it lacks a little bit of a deeper plot, but for the most part, we can forgive them because the show itself is so fun. Role assignment, there are 4 distinct MCs, as we all know. They invite the audience to pick favorites, but unfortunately, it lacks deeper dialogue or backstories, which is why I don't give it a higher score. Visual storytelling is great. There's even simulated weather to try to tell, as we say famously, show, don't tell. We paint a very vivid experience as you go through the attraction. The message is great through song and spectacle. It champions community and the power of shared joy. The queue is fantastic. I've already talked about that. And thematically, every element really locks in and it works well cohesively. And I'm going to be very, very unoriginal. And from a delight point of view, I also give it an 8. From the very first impressions, there are a lot of smiles on people's faces. I don't think I need to sell you on this. There's lots of great memories, lots of nostalgia about the show. There are good energy levels throughout. And yeah, it's and you can't knock it from an originality point of view. It essentially created a whole industry in and of itself, known as Audio-Animatronics. So we've got to take our hat off and recognize the historical pillar that the Tiki Room brought to Disney history. Everybody loves revisiting it for the most part, especially certain people like Theme Park Casual, who have been on the Tiki Room almost 30 or 40 times in a single day. But it was fun to see him go through that. It's easy to slip again and just watch it over and over again. Accessibility, there's no problems at all. Everybody can wander in. And the length is pretty good. It's a 16-minute show, so it doesn't feel quite so long, doesn't feel quite so short, and it's just a fun ride, or fun attraction anyway. So an 8 obviously gives us an 8. So that's what we rate the Tiki Room as. I would encourage you to go to the website, go to grandmiraculous.com. The code tonight is Jose, Jose, and go ahead and punch in what you think your impression is of the Tiki Room, and we'll compare notes next week. Here's the answer to the trivia question. Here's a picture of the original ticket. It was 75 cents. So like I mentioned earlier, 75 cents was actually higher than the highest band e-ticket, which was 50 cents. So it was kind of a big sell to try to get people into this room that nobody really originally had any idea what was going on inside it, which is why they brought the Barker Bird out there to pitch the show and try to get people into the show. And speaking of, I see Mr. Theme Park Casual in chat. Hey, TPC. I'm happy that you decided to join us tonight, given your maybe a little bit of leftover PTSD from your epic all-day Tiki Room journey, which was a lot of fun to watch. Thank you for doing that. Okay, so that wraps up the Tiki Room. Hope you enjoyed that. I need to talk on a slightly personal note for a moment here. We've been doing this now for 9 episodes, and it's been a lot of fun. I've been so grateful for everybody's support and everybody's kind comments. People in chat have given me lots of great feedback, and I look forward to bringing some of that feedback to the show. We're coming up on the 10th episode, and the 10th episode of anything you do is always a monumental journey. And from the very beginning, people have asked me, John, your username is Spaceship Ears. When are you going to talk about Spaceship Earth? Well, I figure episode 10 is a perfect time to do that. So now that we have some sea legs, we're going to talk about Spaceship Earth. So next week, I'm very proud to bring you Spaceship Earth. We're going to go through and talk about this wonderful attraction. Of course, my father's in chat. He worked on it as well. And you might notice something slightly different here. Well, there's a part 1. Yes, we are going to do a 2-parter episode for Spaceship Earth. The plan is next week, we're going to do our usual historical walkthrough. We'll talk about whether the attraction works or not. I'll give you a hint. I think it does. But we're going to do our usual thing next week. The following week, I'm very excited because my dear dad has offered to come on the show with us. So the week after that, we're going to have a part 2 episode where we're going to have a dialogue where my father, John F. Cure Jr., is going to come on the show with us, and we'll just basically talk for an hour about this wonderful attraction, why it's so critical to Epcot Future World as a whole, and we can talk about where the parks are going from there on. So I'm very excited to bring you this two-parter episode. Next week, we'll talk about Spaceship Earth, and then we're going to have my dad, come join the show, and we'll talk shop a little bit, which I think will be a lot of fun. So I'm very grateful, Dad, for your offer to come on. And coincidentally, it'll be right around his birthday too. So you can all wish him a happy birthday at the time as well. So looking forward to that. Hope you join us next week. And I will leave you, as I usually do, with some of Ray Bradbury's comments. I'll just talk about the end a little bit. Lock into a dream that is your own. Find what truth is in your blood and beat a path from here to there. Your life is yours to own and be. The world is yours to shape and change. The stars are yours as just reward. So I look forward to having you next week, where we'll figure out why some of these words are so monumental and why I keep repeating them week after week. And I want to thank you again for coming to the show and supporting what we're doing here. It's a lot of fun, and I wouldn't be able to do it without your enthusiasm and your support. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.